In today's video, I celebrate 12 years off the benzodiazepine medication Xanax. I'm going to share a bit about my story and also offer some tips for you. Stay tuned, I think you'll find this useful.
Who are you living for? What are they asking for? Trying to be everyone's favorite, weighs you down every day while you parade in the frenzy. Be careful not to run far from home.
Hello there everyone and welcome back to The Lovely Grind. My name is Michael Priebe and my website is lovelygrind.com. That's where you can find my blog posts and information about my coaching, my online courses, and my Support and Success monthly membership area. So I hope you'll check out lovelygrind.com to connect with me, and I'm glad you're connecting with me today via my YouTube channel. And today's video, which is a celebration video, I'm celebrating this month 12 years off the benzo medication Xanax. So to commemorate that and to share some inspiration and tips with all of you, I thought I'd make a video about it. Now, last month, I made a video celebrating another milestone, which was being a number of years off of the SSRI medication Paxil. I got off that medication at the end of 2012. I got off of Xanax at the very beginning of 2014. So a dozen years off, that's a big deal, obviously. I remember when 12 days off seemed like it would be impossible. So 12 years off, it sounds incredible even really to say that. And I think that if you're going through the withdrawal and healing process now, or the process of tapering one of these benzo medications, maybe it seems impossible that you're ever going to see the end of the taper or reach a point, if you're already off the medications, where your body feels strong and rebalanced again and you feel calm again. So that's in part why I make these videos, to let you know it is possible, to give you that hope and encouragement to keep going, and to share some applicable tips with all of you. To recap a little bit about my story, specifically as it relates to the Xanax, I was put on Paxil and Xanax when I was entering my senior year of college way back when, for panic attacks I was having and some general and social anxiety. You know, some of the anxiety was in fact related to the panic attacks, because once you have one or two, you worry about the next one happening, and before you know it, there's like an existence of perpetual focus on anxiety and anxiety about anxiety. So maybe some of you can relate to that. But I visited a family doctor who I only saw once when I was at home for summer break before my senior year. And I was given the two prescriptions for the SSRI Paxil and then the Xanax, which at that time was written out for 0.25 milligrams as needed. So that was for instances of panic or acute anxiety. So maybe giving a speech or taking a test. And at first, that Xanax worked very well. It seemed like a bit of an answer to a prayer. The Paxil I never really wanted to take, and that never really sat right with me from the get-go. The Xanax, that seemed to work a little bit. I could see how that could be helpful, but what happened in my situation, as it does to many people, was I began building a tolerance to the medication. So over the years, I needed more and more of it to do what used to be done with less of it in the past. And also the dependence, not just physically, but psychologically, was very insidious. So I began to, in a real sense, believe over time that I couldn't do anything without the Xanax. You know, I couldn't go to work without it. I couldn't drive without it. I couldn't socialize without it. Whatever the case may be, over the years, I was trying to, in effect, proactively and preemptively head off the anxiety before it even came. And so my entire day turned into taking the Xanax. And in effect, over time, part of that was trying to stave off the interdose withdrawals. So a prescription that began as 0.25 milligrams as needed over the years turned into a prescription for 4 milligrams each and every day. And in fact, I was oftentimes taking more than the prescribed 4 milligrams and running out of my prescription early, or at times even ordering it online. So that just goes to illustrate how under the thumb of this medication I was. Now, I took that medication for over a dozen years, And the decision to begin tapering was really part of a greater decision that I had made to try getting off these medications altogether, the Paxil and the Xanax. I was experiencing a lot of ill effects. Some of these I'll outline here. Part of it was living in a state of near perpetual anxiety, like I just alluded to, never really making any inroads onto stemming that anxiety or coping with it naturally, always just relying on the medication, then suffering tolerance and interdose withdrawals from the medication. So the increased anxiety had just gotten worse over the years. A depression had set in. A perpetual sense of fatigue had set in. Taking benzodiazepine medication all day will tend to do that, I guess. And there was also just some more insidious effects where it just seemed hard to set goals in a meaningful way or follow through on them in a meaningful way or ever get some real mental clarity in a meaningful way. So there was a lot of ill effects that led me to the decision to begin tapering. And a lot of people, always wonder, well, how did you taper? It's easy to be really intimidated by that idea of tapering before you begin because there's so many different opinions out there, so many different options out there. People worry about if you don't do it the exact right way, are you going to prevent yourself from healing or have permanent damage or have a seizure and so forth. And I worried about those things too. But what I ended up doing was pretty rudimentary. I used a cheap pill cutter from like a Walgreens or a Walmart and dry cut the medication. And it took me about 12 to 14 months to taper down from 4 milligrams to 0. And I don't have exact records until, unfortunately, towards the end of my taper. But, I read the Ashton manual or parts of it and just used that as a bit of a guideline as far as, okay, we're going to try to do it somewhat gradually, somewhat methodically, and go from there. So my taper by no means was perfect. A lot of people would be much more methodical about it, perhaps much more exact about it, perhaps much more gradual about it. But I think the bottom line with a taper is you try to use common sense, make a plan that's somewhat gradual, somewhat methodical, and then find a pace and a method that works to keep you motivated to get to 0. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. But that is ultimately the goal of any taper, is to get to 0, right? So you want to try to find a plan and a timeline and a method that works to keep you motivated to do that. Actually, my first goal in tapering wasn't even to make a cut from the 4 milligrams. It was just to get to a steady point where I was only taking 4 milligrams each and every day. Because, as I mentioned before, I was so dependent on the medication, I was oftentimes running out early. And then I'd have to call the pharmacy and at times concoct a story to try to get an early refill. And there was a bit of shame involved in that and some wake-up calls as to how I was living and what place these medications had in my life. But that was my first goal, get to a steady place where I was used to never going up above the 4 milligrams. It was like a psychological thing that I could stick to what I said I was going to do. And from there, I began reducing. And as I said, it took about 12 to 14 months for me to get to a point where I then jumped off the medication. And I can still remember when I did make the decision to jump from the medication. And I've told this story maybe once or twice before, but it had to do with my grandma's funeral. And that's for a couple reasons. One, I was working at a large tech college at the time. And when I got news that my grandma had passed, I knew that I'd be going home to attend that funeral, and I would have a leave of absence, bereavement leave, for a short period of time. And so if I went to 0 milligrams and somehow it was significantly worse than what I'd already been experiencing, which is a little bit hard to imagine, but that was the fear. Somehow if that happened, I would be in the privacy of my own apartment and dealing with that instead of in the workplace. The other tie-in with my grandma's funeral was it was a bit of a reflection on the finite amount of time we all have on this earth and on mortality. And the line from Shawshank Redemption comes to mind and came to mind back then, get busy living or get busy dying. And it was like, okay, it's now or never. You've been dragging this out long enough. It's time to move forward. It's time to move forward with the idea that you can survive and have a life without these medications. And so that's what I did. And guess what? When I got off the medications, nothing was significantly worse than what I went through with the tapering. It was just like a bit of the same for a while, and then improvements. Now, the tapering was a very difficult process, and it is for many people, for several reasons. One, you're constantly being asked to get your body and mind used to a different dose than it was used to the previous day and the previous week. And it's like a constant bit of a shock to the central nervous system. It's also a huge preoccupation during that time. You're constantly thinking about this taper as you're going through it, wondering if you're doing it properly, wondering when you should do the next cut, wondering if you should make some sort of change, or if you're even doing the right thing at all, and you should turn around and just head the other direction. So there's the symptoms, obviously, but then there's like that psychological preoccupation and the way that it just kind of consumes each and every day. So it's a good thing to have that taper finished. Ultimately, I was scared to get to zero, but even just having that process cleared off the table and only dealing with the symptoms then, many of which I was, again, just used to, was a blessing and a good thing. So if you're tapering, look forward to the end of your taper. It ushers a hopeful new chapter into your story, and there's a lot of space cleared out in the mind when you're not thinking about that all the time. So what are a couple tips that I can share with all of you who are perhaps thinking about tapering a benzo medication, or still tapering a benzo medication, or even off already and working through an ongoing healing and rebalancing process? Well, I guess number one would be, don't worry about doing every single thing perfectly. And by that I mean, don't worry that you have to follow the same diet or the same taper plan or the same X, Y, and Z that someone online says you have to follow. There's a lot of people out there who are very strong in their opinions as far as telling people what they have to do or what they ought to do or absolutely can't do in order to get off these medications and heal. The bottom line is, you have to find a way to get off the medications that works for you. So the goal of a taper is to get to zero. However that's done, and again, there should be a gradual process of tapering reductions, but that being said, there's many different ways to do that. So don't worry that just because you didn't do it the way another person said you had to, or the same as someone else did that you ran into online, that you're not going to heal. There's many ways to go about this. You should have it supervised if possible. You should have people around you that are aware of what you're doing and can support you. And then you find a way that works for you, both in methodology and pace. And even outside of the taper, there's a whole lot of information and opinion online, and a whole lot of armchair quarterbacks, including some of whom put doctor before their name, that will tell you what you absolutely have to do or can't do with regards to diet, supplementation, physical activity, and every other thing under the sun. So again, use common sense. I would say if you can, try to avoid putting additional prescription medications into the picture. That would be a pretty good rule. If you're tapering, try to avoid going up on the medication. That would also be another pretty good rule if possible. And then again, the goal, just to take care of your body and mind and stay motivated to get to that 0 point and allow your healing to then progress from there, which it will. There's a lot of things that a person worries about while they're tapering or while they're going through withdrawal. You worry about if you did something wrong, if it's going to cause a setback, if it's going to prevent you from healing. And sometimes people, in fact, tell you in those exact words that you did something wrong. And I've told this before too, but I can remember, going on forums for a while and sharing with the people there that I'd been drinking valerian root tea, Yogi brand bedtime tea with a rather minuscule amount of valerian root in. And I was finally, getting some momentum, I felt, as far as my sleep went, because insomnia was a big symptom and problem for me. So I was making some headway, but then someone online said, well, you're drinking that tea, it's going to interfere with the upregulation and healing of receptors, and so you're dooming yourself. And I worried about that for a while, and then I got angry, and then I came to the realization I don't care what some nameless, faceless person in a forum online says to me, because I'm getting off these medications, I'm taking care of myself, I'm not taking additional prescription meds or doing some crazy invasive therapies. I know I'm going to get better, and I'm going to stop listening to outside noise. And sometimes that's really the best recipe to keep yourself moving forward, is to block out some of that noise, because it can become very overwhelming if you let it. Another bit of advice or a tip for those of you who are still tapering or off the meds and working through an ongoing healing process: keep in mind the benefits of what you're doing. Keep in mind the reasons behind what you're doing. Like, you have good things to look forward to. You started this process for a reason, so remember those reasons in order to see yourself through when the times get hard. What are some of the benefits? Well, I would say one big benefit of getting off these benzo medications and eventually staying off them, at least in my case, was a large-scale reduction in anxiety, which sounds counterintuitive and even crazy. But as I shared before, I was in the absolute grips of dependence on the medications and perpetual anxiety while on these medications, in part due to tolerance withdrawal, in part due to inner dose withdrawal, in part due to not having the sustained energy and motivation to follow through on fitness and self-care goals, and in part thinking that I could just be lazy and allow the medications to do the work for me, so I never learned any real coping skills or mindset skills surrounding the issue of anxiety. Like, those things came later. You kind of get thrown into the deep end of the pool with this, and you get forced to confront these things and pick up some skills. But all of that put together, learning coping and anxiety reduction and management skills, adopting new self-care regimens that helped bring baseline anxiety down, not having the complications of the medications in the picture, that all just helps to usher in, at least for me and many others, a new reality as far as the anxiety experience goes. And it's really miraculous compared to how things used to be. So like, anxiety now compared to anxiety when I was on the medication seems hard to even put the two side by side. It's such night and day difference. So that's, I guess, one of the tips. There's many benefits to getting off the meds. Obviously, the benefit of not having to worry about doctor's visits and prescriptions and refills or running out early. The benefit of never having to worry about or go through a taper process again. And then again, the benefits like just better mental health and a better experience with anxiety. So keep those benefits in mind to keep yourself moving forward through this healing process. One final tip: even as you're dealing with the symptoms of this process, and there may be many, even as you're dealing with the symptoms of this process, try to live some life anyway. Don't allow this withdrawal process to become your entire identity, or to back you into a corner of retreat and isolation the entire time you're going through a healing process. Even though it's difficult, even though it takes pushing, try to continue to work if you can, or to socialize with friends and family if you can, or to travel, even if it's a day trip or a weekend trip if you can, to exercise, and so forth. There's so many symptoms in this process. A few of the big ones, I guess, that I dealt with: obviously increased anxiety and fear. That's there for basically everyone. Muscle tightness in my back and in my abdomen, nerve pain, stabbing nerve pains in my legs and in my thighs in particular, a lot of tension, headaches, and strange brain sensations, insomnia, and so forth. There's just a lot of symptoms, and it'd be super easy to allow those to compel a person to quit their job, refuse to pick up the phone or text friends and family, to not follow through on a daily goal of getting close to God or exercising or other aspects of self-care and self-development. But again, even though these symptoms are frightening and confusing and somewhat limiting, do not allow them to become everything. Do not allow the withdrawal process to take over your whole identity. As much as you can, try to live some life anyway. For one, that takes up time, and it keeps your mind distracted, which is golden in this process because you have to pass through the time one way or the other. 2, that concept allows you to prevent certain mental and physical atrophy by staying active and staying engaged with activities. And 3, it's important for self-esteem because it's really easy for self-esteem to take a big hit in this process. So if you can stay productive, set little goals for yourself, and know that at the very least you're trying very hard to keep up with responsibilities and live some life anyway, that's going to help you to have a more positive self-image as you're going through this process that can, again, be very challenging because of symptoms, but doesn't have to become your whole life or completely limiting. So I hope these tips have helped you. I hope it's helped to share my story, and I hope that you'll continue to come back to this channel, and I hope you'll visit my website, lovelygrind.com. That's where, again, you can find out information to connect with me in coaching. You can register for my online courses or my monthly membership area. And you can also find a lot of blog posts. So lovelygrind.com. Hope you'll visit that. And I thank you for returning to this channel. And I hope you'll keep coming back. I'll keep making these videos. Until next time, please remember to take care of yourself and your dreams.